So we've got Marius on next. So Marius, welcome. Thanks for attending. He's going to take Attack the Cloud and take it away.
Oh, guys, thank you for introduction. So my name is Marius, and I've been working best part of last 10 years in physical security, and I decided to kind of combine my two passions with IT and security and kind of transition into cybersecurity. So basically, I'm going to be talking about Attack the Cloud. So basically, MITRE ATT&CK framework within the cloud. I'm going to discuss some common attacks and how threat-informed defense can help your organizations. So to start with, just a little story how basically the topic came about. So lately, I have made a lot of friends within kind of InfoSec community, and everyone's been really helpful and helped me mentor and kind of develop my skills. So one of my mentors basically kind of nudged me and said, next step in your development, you should kind of step outside your comfort zone and maybe do a webinar, you know. And but I was like, I don't really know what to talk about. So he just asked me basically, what are you passionate about? And that's kind of the last two topics that I've been really working hard at was, you know, cloud security and MITRE framework. So he just said, why don't you combine the two of them? And that's how basically the topic came about. So without blabbing too much on, I'm just going to run through, guys, what I'm going to talk tonight. So the schedule of the presentation is going to be, so basically first I'm going to introduce what MITRE ATT&CK framework itself is, how it's been basically developed, what it's all about, and basically how can it help your organizations. And then we move on to basically MITRE cloud framework that's developed specifically for the cloud. I'm going to run through a few examples of common attacks in the cloud, what kind of procedures do adversaries use, and basically how you can reverse engineer your defenses and how you can detect them as well. And then I'm going to move on to basically your cloud infrastructure security and how you can basically structure your security, and I'm going to talk through some of the best practices in securing your cloud environment. So moving on, first of all, what is MITRE ATT&CK? So MITRE ATT&CK basically is a framework, is a comprehensive kind of matrix of tactics and techniques used by threat hunters, red teamers, and defenders, basically to better classify attacks and to assess your organization's risk. The aim of the framework itself is to provide post-compromise detection of adversaries in enterprises by illustrating these actions an attacker may have taken. So I think kind of the framework itself helps organizations to answer one of the two key questions, basically. How did the attacker get in, and how they are moving around? So kind of the knowledge is based, kind of designed to help answer those questions while contributing to the awareness of organizations' security posture at the perimeter and beyond. So organizations can use the framework to identify holes in the defenses and prioritize them based on risk. And also it's helpful for threat hunters who can leverage the attack framework to look for specific techniques adversaries can use in conjunction with others. The framework can be extremely useful for gauging basically your environment's level of visibility against targeted attacks with existing tools deployed across your organization endpoints. So basically, the framework itself has kind of three flavors that split into kind of three subcategories. So you have one of the most important and one of the main ones is enterprise attack, which basically cloud is developed from that. You have then pre-attack, which covers tactics and techniques basically used pre-compromise. So basically what attackers would use before exploiting the target. And then we have mobile attack, which basically a model for adversarial tactics and techniques used to gain access to your mobile devices. So MITRE is basically a not-for-profit organization that supports several US government agencies, began to develop their framework in 2013. The framework, which stands for Adversarial Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge, was released in May 2015, and then sort of every quarter is updated since. So we have 11 main tactics, which I'm going to expand into my next slide. But basically, tactics is will help to answer the question why adversaries are trying to get into your infrastructure. And then each tactic can contain an array of techniques that have been observed being used in a while by either malware, threat actor groups to compromise your infrastructure. Tactics are kind of probably will help more to answer questions how part of the attack and how attackers are, for example, escalating privileges, how adversaries exfiltrating data, and so on. So as I mentioned, while there are only 11 tactics, there's, by the time of I'm talking now, there's over 300 techniques that adversaries can use. I think the best way to kind of visualize that is if you jump into MITRE ATT&CK website, there is a navigator which kind of lists all your tactics, and which I'm going to show you in the following slides as well. But it's kind of nifty open source web app that allows basically for basic navigation. And each technique is it has a code for it. So it starts with a T followed by 4 numbers. So for example, spear phishing is T1192, and remote access tools is T1219, and so on, basically. Kind of each technique kind of gives you a contextual information like permissions required, what platform technique has been used on, and basically how to detect those commands and processes they basically used in. And what are the procedures basically? So procedures, as far as attack concern, is describes the way adversaries or software implements a particular technique. And then talking about basically threat intelligence. So while the framework has been around for a number of years now, I think it's especially caught on of late because the way it helps organizations and end users and government basically share threat intelligence. While there are certainly kind of other ways to share threat intel, ATT&CK provides kind of common language that's standardized and globally accessible. Analysts can structure the intelligence around the behavior, while defenders can structure information around the behavior they can detect and mitigate. And lastly, talking about basically who does the attack framework benefit? So it benefits both. It benefits red teamers and blue teamers alike. So for example, it can aid red teams can follow basically MITRE's adversarial emulation plans and kind of test their networks defenses by modeling or emulating adversary behavior classified in attack framework. So and basically can kind of gauge effectiveness of defenses, while blue teams can kind of leverage attack framework to get a better grip on what adversaries are doing, and this way reverse engineer their defenses. So jumping on to, so that's the kind of the matrix and 11 tactics that are commonly used at the moment. So we have initial access is basically how adversaries will try and get into your network. We have execution, how they will try and run your malicious code. We have persistence, how to maintain a foothold, because some of the malware might run on, for example, memory, and once you restart your machine, the adversaries basically can't get back in, so they will try and kind of maintain a foothold within your system. Privilege escalation, so how they can gain higher level permissions. Defense evasion, how they will try and avoid to be detected. Credential access, so how they can steal names and passwords. Also discovery, so how they will figure out your environment. lateral movement as well. So how they will move through your environment, collection. So basically that covers some gather of data of interest to their goal. We have then command and control, so how they will communicate with compromised systems to control them, and exfiltration, how they will try and basically exfiltrate or steal data. And impact will basically talk about manipulation, interruption, or how they will destroy the data. And as you can see at the moment on the right hand side, there is over 330 techniques at the moment seen. So if you guys want to have a look, so the first link is the link to my MITRE ATT&CK website. And the second link basically is the link of the enterprise framework talking directly about the cloud itself. So that's how Cloud Matrix looks like. As you can see at the top, we have all the 11 tactics, and then they are split into techniques. The ones you can see that has kind of Roman numerals next to them, they have some sub-techniques, and basically they can be kind of split into one or more kind of sub-techniques that adversaries can use. So I would like to run through a few examples and kind of few techniques that adversaries can use. So if we look down at the initial access, we'll be talking about how adversaries can exploit a public-facing application. So if you're on a website and on that matrix, and if you click on the exploit public-facing application, it will take you to basically a next website that looks something like that. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we have some information that will give you an ID number, which is T1190. It will list if there's any techniques. The tactic obviously is initial access, and then obviously what's quite helpful as well, it will give you platforms that it has been used before. So for example, AWS, Azure, and the rest. So what is exploit public-facing application? So basically, it's adversaries kind of will try and attempt or find a weakness basically in your web app, public-facing web app, basically. And this can be anything from, you know, SQL databases, standard services like SMB or SSH, you know, network kind of administration and management tools like SNMP. And I think especially if we look at the next slide, which will help us as well. So it will explain, for example, threat actors and what kind of procedures they will use. So we have a list of, for example, some advanced persistent kind of groups that work within the kind of how they kind of attack your defenses. I think especially where MITRE ATT&CK framework shines, you can do, for example, a simple search depending on which kind of industry you operate. So for example, if you work within finance, you can search for specific attack groups that target finance group, and that's how you can basically reverse engineer your defense. So a few examples, for example, APT28 has conducted a SQL injection attacks against organizations' external websites, and then you have something like Axiom has been observed using SQL injection to gain access to your systems. So next one, which is really helpful as well, you have a list of mitigations and how you can prevent from adversaries gaining access within your infrastructure. So you have a list on your left, and then you have some little descriptions. So for example, you can use application isolation and sandboxing, I think, which is what's really important, network segmentation, you know, and obviously any public-facing web apps or your infrastructure should always be regularly scanned for vulnerabilities, and then deploy patches to make sure they are up to date. And also, MITRE ATT&CK helps you to detect the principles of detection and how you can try and monitor this behavior. So one of the examples will be, for example, monitor your application logs for abnormal behavior that may indicate any attempted or successful exploitation. Use deep packet inspection and find kind of artifacts such as SQL injection, and obviously use web application firewalls. Next tactic we're going to have to look at is persistence and how adversaries can manipulate accounts. So if we go account manipulation, again, as you can see, there is ID number 1098, and then you have 4 sub-techniques, and the tactic is persistence. So again, you have a list of platforms that's used for, and basically in this section, it will explain how adversaries might, manipulate accounts to maintain access to victim systems, and basically how they will try and modify credentials, or permission groups. So there's a list of procedures that they might use. So for example, APT group 3 has been known to add credential accounts to local admin groups to maintain elevated access. And then I think anyone who's done some red teaming, played around with Hack the Box or Try Hack Me will know a tool called Mimikatz. So essentially, this is credential dumper, has been used basically to kind of take the hashes and basically get into your accounts without knowing the clear text value. So mitigations, how we can mitigate these kind of attacks. So one of the most common mitigations would be multi-factor authentication. So always make sure, I think some companies are known to use multi-factor for admin accounts, but I think multi-factor should be used for every single account to prevent any problems like that. Again, you have network segmentation. I think where cloud really shines, within, you can create multiple virtual private clouds and kind of segment your network like that. And obviously privileged account management. I think that's a key point as well. Any admin accounts should not be used for day-to-day uses. And then how we can detect this. So we can collect events and correlate them with changes, to account objects or permissions. And then you have a list of event IDs that you can monitor. Any kind of modification to your accounts with correlation like that can be very suspicious and always should be looked at. Next one. So defense evasion and how adversaries can impair your defenses. So we have 7 sub-techniques and kind of how adversaries will maliciously try and modify kind of components in order to kind of hinder or disable your defense mechanisms. So that can be such as firewalls, antivirus, and kind of your detection capabilities that defenders would use. So here's a list of kind of sub-techniques which kind of talks about the same. So, but for example, you can then try and disable your cloud logs, kind of indicator blocking, or disable or modify your system firewall. So mitigations, I think very important is kind of restrict your file and directory permissions with the kind of without preventing interfering with your security and logging services. I think registry kind of permissions as well. That's an important thing to look at, and obviously make sure proper user permissions are in place, and to prevent adversaries from disabling these kind of logging services. And then detection. So how we can detect that. So I think it's key to monitor processes and command line arguments, and then to see, kind of any security tools or your logging services are killed. I think key aspect in that, in terms of logs as well. If possible, try and kind of use your logs in read-only memory, so they can't be altered by any adversaries. And then the last exercise we can talk about is credential access and how adversaries can try and brute force that. So adversaries may brute force, use a kind of brute force techniques to gain access to accounts when passwords are basically unknown or just hashes are obtained. So brute forcing is basically what means is just adversaries trying to guess kind of passwords So try and gain hashes of your password. So, and it comes with a ID T1110, and then basically, so procedures. You have groups like APT39 would use encrypt to try and reveal your credentials, and then Fin5 has been known to use a tool called Get5 Penetrator to look for remote login and hard-coded credentials. So mitigations. I think account use policies. So kind of set lockout policies. That's very important. Make sure, you know, after like 5 unsuccessful logins, you know, account can be locked out for a certain amount of time. You can use multi-factor authentication as well, and then kind of password policies. I think that's kind of a key area as well. So kind of have long passwords. I think nowadays kind of guidelines go more from, used to be 8 characters. I think everyone's kind of trying to move to 12 characters, upper, lower cases, numbers, and special characters. And then again, user account management, that comes in as well in here. So detection, how you can detect that. So again, monitor authentication logs for your system and application, login failures of valid accounts, you know, and things like that, you know. You can kind of, authentication failures should always be investigated, and you see whether it's, you know, legitimate users kind of forgetting their passwords, or there's something nefarious going on. And then I will talk a bit and explain about your defenses and how you can improve your security posture. I think the first and kind of key area to understand is within the cloud is know what your organization and what are you responsible for. So moving from, you know, on premises to the cloud, we have a shared responsibility model, but sometimes I think some analysts or some organizations don't really know what they are protecting. So for example, if we take an example, infrastructure as a service, cloud provider actually are responsible for, you know, for physical networks, servers, and storage and hypervisors. But you as organization, you are responsible for virtual networks, for operating systems. You have to make sure your virtual machines are patched. You are responsible for applications and any data within those applications, or anything that you store in your storage devices, and people itself. You know, for example, identity and account management. That's a big feature as well that you are responsible for. And then once we move from models, for example, like platform as a service, then cloud provider will take a bit more responsibility away from you. So they will take over virtual networks and operating systems. So you're only responsible for your applications and data and people. And then we move into software as a service. And then cloud providers will take over applications. So you're only left to secure data and people. I think it's a key area to understand and know what are you responsible and what you need to secure to prevent any problems within your cloud infrastructure. If we move on, again, you know, a kind of key 3 points how to kind of secure your cloud infrastructure. I think some security analysts might forget, but you know, data protection is key. You have to secure your data that is stored locally, that, you know, is in transit as well, and you know, in all areas that it's moved. I think where data protection comes in place is very important, you know. And then in the cloud, again, security hygiene still matters, you know. Security cloud providers, I mean, they have developed a large number of tools to help you, you know, to improve your security hygiene, you know, from going from Azure, for example. They have a security center which gives you a kind of a score and explains, you know, gives you kind of recommendations how you can improve your defenses. And always you have to make sure you improve your visibility. So make sure you kind of turn on all the logging, you know, it comes from health of your machines, through network logging and anything that's going on within your infrastructure, which I think is very helpful because you can feed that into SIEM tools and analytical tools and see what's going on within your infrastructure itself. So again, one of the key areas I think is identity and access management. So This is kind of a list of kind of top 8 kind of cloud and IAM practices. So define first line defenses. So I think you have to start with at the very first beginning. You know, I think as a key area as well is use centralized identity management. So if you have on premises Active Directory, you can move that into the cloud, you know, and combine that all in one, and make sure enable single sign-on, you know, enable conditional access. So for example, you know, if you have your, for example, DevOps team, they work in 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, they should not have access at 7 p.m. because they might not be in the office. So things like that, you know, you can always prevent and help secure, you know, enable multi-factor authentication. Use role-based access control. I think that's key as well. Instead of defining how access is given from account to account, group same people who work in the same function, put them onto one group and define their permissions that way. Limit privileged accounts, and you know, turn on active identity monitoring, which is very key in kind of bolstering up your defenses. And this is a kind of a cloud security model that we can look at, and it kind of explains what you need to look at within your infrastructure, your people, and the data that you need to secure. You know, things like encryption, data discovery. You have authentication and logical segmentation and things like that. What I would like to talk next as well is kind of a 2 areas of kind of drawbacks. I think a big problem within cloud is user error configuration, and kind of one of the most common exposures is kind of believed to be the root cause of incidents of up to like 97% by 2022. For example, I think there's common things that have been revealed recently about, you know, in AWS S3 buckets that a large portion of organizations left them wide open, and data has been exfiltrated in that way. So you need to make sure you secure those buckets and make sure they don't have public-facing access. And again, as organizations move to kind of working from home, there is a lack of endpoint security. So you need to make sure you kind of employ the best EDR tools and kind of monitor all of your endpoints, you know, especially thinking about, you know, bring your own devices and things like that. That's kind of a key area to focus on and bolster your defenses. And lastly, it's kind of essential 8 security controls. I think where sometimes some analysts can go wrong, for example, for web apps, they'll try and do a blacklist, and I think it's very hard to kind of find all the list of bad things that can happen. So instead, I think you should be using whitelisting and only kind of list the acceptable kind of entries that your application should accept. You should patch your applications, configure Microsoft Office macros, you know, kind of use application hardening, and then how you can basically limit those attacks. So restrict admin privileges, make sure you patch your operating systems, you know, use multi-factor authentication, and then lastly, you know, how you can recover that data and, you know, kind of how your system availability works. Make sure you use daily backups. And then that's it, you know, guys. Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure, you know, to talk about the kind of two of my passions, and I would welcome any questions. I know there's probably not much time left, but you know, you have things like Slack, or you know, and you can contact me in there.
Marius, that was awesome. Thanks very much. There is one question we do have time to run it by you, if you're cool with that.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of a 2 people had the exact same thought at the same time, it seems.
Yeah.
So this is from Tim and Hail Nolly via Twitch. Does MITRE have a prioritization methodology like PCI DSS? It could take months, if not years, to action these steps. And by the way, great talk is their comment. So
yeah. Well, I think it's kind of you have to kind of look at the framework itself, and as I mentioned, kind of in my talk, you kind of have to look at, because the way MITRE works as well, which kind of helps, you can search through organizations, and for example, your kind of where you're working in what environment. So for example, if you're working within finance, it gives you the exact kind of APTs that work within finance and what they're trying to kind of infiltrate. And then I think you have to look at your own infrastructure. So some of the maybe techniques and some of the tactics might not kind of work in your environment. So you have to look at and then kind of work your way down. And I think you have to look at the kind of risk matrix. What is the most important for your organization, and how you will secure that, and work kind of backwards and see where, you know, whether you can transfer some of the risk, whether you can accept some of the risk, and what you need to mitigate.
Okay, well, listen, thanks. The Twitch is pretty quick. Great answer. There is one more question in Slack, but I'll let people just chat with you and grab you on Slack, or
yeah, sure,
on various social platforms, or whatever contact details you feel comfortable giving them. But yeah, no, hang about with us. Marius, that's been awesome. Sean?
Yeah, great talk. Awesome talk. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure.